So one of the things that I've been blessed with is the truth that was expressed to me when I first moved here last August, which was, if you don't have allergies by the time you arrive in Washington, D.C., you will have them before you go. And I do. So I'm not sick, but I got this throat thing going on, so I apologize in advance if I cough or whatever. Why don't more Catholics go to Mass? Several years ago, that question was posed to Cardinal Dolan of New York on a rather high platform kind of profile interview. And his response to it was by saying, you know, rather than throwing up our hands and lamenting about the folks that are not coming to Mass, why don't we look to the parishes where people do go to Mass and perhaps even communities are growing? Why don't we look there? Because when we look there, what do we find? He said, we'll find joyful priests preaching truth with welcoming, warm communities who share that truth and hospitality with one another and those who come through the doors. Joy, I believe, is contagious. We'd see more people becoming priests and more people in the pews and more people. If we became famous for being joyful. And that for whatever reason is not like the rep that most Catholics have in the public imagination, right? You think Catholic, we don't necessarily think, oh, the joyful spirit that comes from. No, unfortunately, we haven't done a great job about representing that out to the world for whatever reason. But we can. And it's important in this season of joy to really start thinking seriously about how we're going to witness to that. This is especially true in the Easter season. It's a joy-filled season. And I hope my joy can rub off on you and yours on each other and all of us on those we encounter when we leave this place. Because isn't that what we say we do at the end of Mass, right? Go out there and do what we've just done in here sacramentally with the world. Today's scriptures, but none of them use the word, they're all about heaven. And Luke's gospel makes this real effort to show us, remind us, and to teach us about Jesus' risen, real body. His real body. Last week we got the message too, right? With Jesus beelining it over to the doubting Thomas, who says, put your fingers in the holes that the nails made in my real body. I'm really here. And today, Jesus is asking them to make him a meal. Bake up some fish. And all this touching and talking and eating has but one purpose. And that's to remind us that when Jesus rose from the dead to new life in his resurrected body, that is another example of Jesus showing us how he puts on human flesh to show us how to do it. That this is what we're looking forward to as well. Now, the resurrected body is not like a resuscitated body, right? Like we're speaking of some kind of mysterious reality here that requires faith. But the scriptures are meant to let us know not only about sort of this risen Christ, but that it's our resurrection too that we celebrate in this season of resurrection. And I'm sure you've probably encountered this, and hopefully, we're not necessarily believing of this, but like there's way too many people out there, way too many Catholics even out there, that believe like when we die we become angels. Right? You kind of hear like, heaven's gotten one more angel, rest in peace. Nah. There's one thing I can tell you is that there are more than enough angels in heaven. What happens to humans when we die is we enter into the community of the saints. Angels are like verbs. They are the messenger and the message of God at the same time. We are been made in the image and likeness of God to be unified with him in the fullness of our resurrection. Too many of us don't really think how deeply real Jesus' humanity is. We somehow kind of more easily buy into the divine mystery. So Jesus can't be fully divine if he made choices to sin, right? Because fundamentally sin is a choice. But he can't be fully human if he doesn't have every temptation and every opportunity to do so. Just as much as for anybody else. And I think that's something we too easily rob him of. He wasn't some kind of like magic human who had like built-in bumper lanes or training wheels that didn't allow for him to sin. No, he was fully human, like you and I, who never made the choice to sin. He just happened to be the one guy who got it right all the time, right? But that choice had to be real. He had to have the option and the temptation to choose the other in order to be fully human. So a couple things we can gain from that by what we know about Jesus. There's no such thing as a right or a wrong feeling, right? Because he had them all. Feelings aren't right or wrong. They're not good or bad. They just are. It's what we do with them that matters, right? But another thing we can gain from that message too is that truth, that reality of Jesus' humanity is that he knows what you're going through, what all of us are going through. He puts on the human condition, but because he's God, he can get it for all of us, not just for like guys who live to be 33 years old and that's it, right? No, like he understands the human condition fully. And that's the reason why he gives us, for example, the sacrament of reconciliation. Because we're not fully divine. And he does not have unfair expectations of us. He has expectations, but they're not unfair. And so when we celebrate that sacrament, for example, it's not so different than this one. All we're doing by coming in celebrating that sacrament is giving God a chance to show us how much he loves us. That's what it's all about. And I recognize that may not be everybody's experience of the sacrament, but just like if you have a bad dentist and you just go get another one, right? You don't just never go to the dentist again, right? Try it again. If you had a bad shot with somebody, try it again. Because the sacraments, if they're real, and I really believe they are, we only hurt ourselves by not taking advantage of them. And we come here today to celebrate this great sacrament that we continue to approach the Lord in his very real sacramental presence of body and blood in the Eucharist. I am personally filled with joy when I think about what the power of resurrection really means. And preaching about Jesus' resurrection and the love that he has for you and for me is worth being joyful about. I'm filled with joy by faith in what heaven is. I'm filled with joy by realizing that in the resurrection, in the heavenly realm, our scripture today reminds us we get to eat. Because that's like my favorite thing to do. I'm filled with joy because I get to preach the good news. And our life on earth isn't for nothing. The relationships that we have here bind and keep us together in heaven. And maybe people don't come to church because we've lost our contagiousness with our joy. And we need to have these seasons that we enter into year after year after year to remind us of that. If you ask anybody out there, not just people in the church, but you ask anybody out there, how many days is Lent? What will they say? 40 days. Everybody knows that. If you ask everybody out there, how many days is Easter? See, because you're a good community of praying people who understand. Most folks out in that street do not know that Easter is 50 days. That this season of Easter is more powerful, more joyful, more present to us than Lent. And yet more people show up on Ash Wednesday than Easter Sunday. It's amazing, right? I think there's something parallel there. Like, it's tough sometimes for us to recognize how good God is, but we do kind of know how limited we are, and we want to be reminded that we are dust, and unto dust we shall return, you know. But because that's true, we know that the story doesn't end there. That we're going to enter into this resurrected reality with God. And that ought to be something that gives us the kind of joy that spreads like COVID. You know, we get so obsessed with spreading the contagions of all kinds of other things, and we don't spend enough time thinking about how important it is to be contagiously joyful about our faith. And it's something that in this country we tend to have this experience where like religion is something we think of as very private and personal. But that's not the case for like most of history and for most of the world. No, this is something that we do together. I always thought it was very cool, this powerful story of when I visited Iceland. Around the year 1000, Iceland came together in their parliament of tribes, having heard the gospel preached to them for several years. And they made a decision as a people to become Christians and Catholics. Anybody who wanted to worship the old Nordic gods was allowed to do that without persecution. But as a community, they came together to discuss and decide what we would animate ourselves as, what would our faith be. That's how important it is to our community. Please, please, please tell everybody about the joy that comes from being a sacramental people, faith in the resurrection, so that they can come and recognize him in the breaking of the bread. We have the great privilege in this country of not having to live our faith in private. We have the great privilege in this country of being able to live our faith very publicly. So as we reflect on how contagiously joyful about our faith in the resurrection are we, as we reflect on that through these 50 days and the days beyond, I pose a question for meditation. If you were not in this country, but one where practicing our faith is a crime, and you were put on trial for being a Catholic Christian of faith, would there be any evidence?